All right, this is Joe Crowder, your Yuba College history instructor. Today we're going to be talking about a historian by the name of Charles Beard. And he had a thesis. It relates to the Constitution of the United States of America. We'll also talk about how government brings in revenue and Hamilton's view on the whole thing, sort of. So let's get started. By the way, your weekly song is Pink Floyd's Money from Dark Side of the Moon 1971, because Charles Beard's thesis has to do with economics. So yeah, there it is, Charles Beard thesis, sources of government revenue, some footnote stuff in the journals. It is not the 12th of April though. It's like October 1. Alright, so the predominant view about the Constitution of the United States. So here's a historian, last name of Davis. After 200 years of rule under the Constitution, we have come to think of it as a perfect ideological and idealistic document created by a gathering of legislative geniuses. Another guy named Hollar. Often these founding fathers have been portrayed as godlike figures who created democracy as we know it for the good of all Americans. That's probably what you've been taught in school. But there's a problem with this predominant view. What is that problem? Let's find out. Founding fathers and Whig historians. Remember, we taught Whig historians last week, and the Constitution. And we take that the Constitution embodied the triumph of the Enlightenment, the glorious flowering of ideas, rationality, empirical science, expressed by such giants of the age as, not what I'm reading you here is what a Whig historian would say, that the Constitution does this. So who are these giants of the age? David Hume, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Voltaire, Immanuel Kant, Montesquieu. So cool, he has only one name. But who is missing? What name should be here on this list but it's not? You give up? If you said this guy, you'd be correct. True story. See, 1776, he wrote The Wealth of Nations. He's considered to be, by Whig historians, the father of capitalism. It's kind of hard to do since it was already around, but they just wrote a book about it. He's the proponent of liberal free trade. That book is The Wealth of Nations. He proposed the idea that government-directed economies are no. He wrote against it, which means he had something in common with the founding fathers. They too despised mercantilism. That's why they were smuggling. A lot. Some of the time. So Charles Beard puts out this thesis that the Constitution is an economic document. It's not a political document. Constitution? Economic? What? Yes, Charles Beard. In 1913, yes, almost 100 years old. Not Charles Beard, he's dead. The document, his thesis, is almost 100 years old. In 1913, he produced a book called An Economic Interpretation of the Constitution. Now, he was one of those progressive schools of thought, and this was the progressive era, right? So we got to keep that in mind as we go through this thesis here today with you. So let's present the evidence. Well, it's the U.S. Constitution, and I don't want you to write any of this down. I just want you to witness the spirit of the Constitution as we go through it. We're going to read between the lines. What's the Constitution getting at? And so we're going to present less than a dozen constitutional articles. I could present a whole lot more, but take too long. So we're not going to do that. So Article 1, Section 8, Clause 2. To borrow money on the credit of the United States. Now, it seems so simple. It's such a short sentence. But is this not economic? What does that mean, to borrow money on the credit of the United States? Ladies and gentlemen, we do this all the time. We do it today. What is our credit rating? Actually, you can find this out just by going online and ask what the interest is on a 30-year Treasury bill. It's like 3.5% or even less than that, which is an amazingly low number. So what this tells me is that the country's credit rating is pretty good. If the United States credit rating was horrible, then the interest rate on the bonds would be much, much higher. So for a country like Greece, if you wanted to buy a bond from Greece, one of their 30-year Treasury bills, it's paying like 30% interest. But that means that it's not a stable government and you might not ever get your money back. So to borrow money on the credit of the United States, kind of like the collateral. Hey, we're cool, we're USA, you can lend us money. We're still going to be here 250 years from now. Maybe. Excuse me. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. Oh, look at that. Lady, cigar box, Internal Revenue. What is this? The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, but all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. So the federal government has the power to collect taxes, to lay taxes. Well, we know that. But duties refer to imports and exports, and that's also what imposts refer to. And excise taxes, your clue of what an excise tax is, that lady right there in the picture here. So you'll see in the symbols that cigars, that's a tax on tobacco. Her hand is over what looks to be a medicine jar. So she can tax medicine, specific medicines. She's on this alcohol barrel here, so you can tax the barrel. A little kind of looking rock down there, scotch. So you can an excise tax is an exact tax on something specific. But the key word is that it's uniform throughout the United States, that no single state can outdo each other in setting different taxes, at least according to taxes that involve imports, exports, and excise taxes, and later income taxes. So according to Charles Beard, Congress having this power to say how much money it wants to make. This year I want a little bit more money, so they raise taxes. Or things are cool, I don't want that much money this year. It's a huge power that the federal government has. It has it right from the get-go, says Charles Beard. And wouldn't it be nice if you and I could say, this year I feel like I should make $1 million, and it comes in? That would be awesome. And essentially that's what the United States is doing in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, according to Charles Beard. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, United States Bankruptcy Court. Wonder what this is about. To establish a uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States of America does encourage companies to risk everything. One of the interesting things about the United States from day one of our Constitution is that our federal government wanted to grow, wanted to be a prosperous nation. We wanted to be like the Europeans, civilized, powerful, Navy, Army, blah, blah, blah. But in order to get there, we only had 3.5 million people. And we had this vague idea of where we wanted to go. So how do you get the country to grow? According to Charles Beard, you turn the bankruptcy laws that were in effect in the 18th century upside down. If people went bankrupt in the 18th century, they went to jail. It was called debtor's prison. What Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4 says is if we ask you, or the United States taps you on the shoulder, or even if we don't, if you're a business, a corporation, we want you to take a little bit of risk, and if you go bankrupt, it's okay. Uncle Sam will clean the slate for you. So I'm not going to jail? No, you're not going to jail. And what about my debt? It's wiped clean. Oh, you're kidding me. Nope, have at it. So one of the first companies that took advantage of this was a corporation in Massachusetts called the Boston, what was it? Just had it. Oh yeah, the Boston Associates. And those Boston Associates were busy making roads, building docks, making ports deeper, dredging ports, port facilities, infrastructure stuff, building canals. And it takes a lot of money to do that. And when you build these big, huge infrastructure projects, that's a lot of money out with no money coming in, because it takes a long time to dredge a port, or build a dock, or build a road. So money coming back in doesn't happen right away. I want to go back to bankruptcies here, because today we see this. We saw this. This is one of the reasons why there were a lot of protest after the economy went south in 2008. That whole "we are the 99% Occupy Wall Street" movement was a lot of those giant corporate firms went belly up and then were bailed out by the United States. AIG Insurance, several banks, General Motors. In September of 2001, when the terrorist attacks occurred, the airline industry struggled. People weren't flying. They were losing money hands over fist. The losses were billions of dollars. Billions with a B. The federal government came in and kept those companies from going bankrupt. A long time ago in the 1970s, General Motors once again was going bankrupt. Lee Iacocca became the new general manager, the new CEO, went to Washington, D.C. and convinced that General Motors was too big to fail. Came out with a K car. I don't know. Look, if you're big enough and important enough to the United States economy, you're protected through bankruptcy. It's true. Not quite capitalism then, is it? Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. What just happened there? To regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. Look at this. To regulate commerce among the several nations and among the several states. So what Charles Beard argued is that we created a free trade zone on the Atlantic coast. These first 13 colonies were free to regulate, could not regulate commerce without federal government approval. So all the collections of customs fees and duties, import and export taxes, each state had its own. The federal government said, no, you can't do that. We can do that, but you can't. Further, it used to be, before we became the United States, that if you were in North Carolina and you wanted to ship something down to South Carolina had to collect taxes because you were exporting North Carolinian products to South Carolina, and that deserves an import tax, see. And so all those went away. All those customs houses on toll roads and port facilities went away, except for those that are owned by the federal government. It's the federal government that's going to regulate commerce among the several states. Thus a free trade zone. Trade amongst yourselves, you no longer have to charge fees, and we won't. Very powerful. Once Charles Beard gave some numbers in his book that showed a significant increase in trade between the different colonies once the Constitution had been enacted. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8. To promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. It's called patent. We are one of the few countries in the world that really respect these things, go out of the way to make sure that inventors invent something and patent it, that they are the ones that receive the benefit from that invention. Even authors, you write something, your written work is protected. If it's your idea, it's protected. People have to pay you if they want to use it. You watch TV, you can't reproduce the NFL blah 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 broadcast, right, without express written permission from the NFL. If they want, they say, well, yeah, you can use it, but you have to pay us a fee. That's where it comes from. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8. This, according to Charles Beard, had the effect of making inventions or the Yankee ingenuity explode. Interesting, Charles Beard wrote in 1913 that from 1900 to 1910, about 90% of all the patents in the world came from the United States of America. United States 90, the rest of the world 10. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8. And it has, once you start inventing something, the Yankee ingenuity is creating jobs. Yeah, I love my iPod. That's Apple. That's California. That's Silicon Valley, man. The ingenuity came from California. The people who assembled it are in China, but that's another story. The Fifth Amendment. There's the part in red that people should not be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. So, you cannot be deprived of your life. Government can't take that away from you. They can't take away your liberty. They cannot take away your property without due process. The amazing thing is that most of you don't know how long due process takes. There are many examples in history that point to the number anywhere between 10 to 15 years, and probably closer to the 15. And Charles Beard points this out, that without due process of law, the 10, 15-year time, the government has to take you. If you do something that the government doesn't like and they want to take away your life or your liberty or your property, they have to sue you, and you can defend yourself in the court of law. It's going to take about 15 years, in which time you still have the right to your life, to your liberty, to your property, to do the things that you were always doing to make the money. And then you might, leave the country, and it's economic, says Charles Beard. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5. To coin money, regulate the value of it. Regulate the value of foreign coin and fix the standard of weights and measures. How cool is this? I'm going to coin money, and I'm going to make that coin over there worth, $3? What do you say? All right, 5. 10? Do I hear 15? 20? Anybody else? And they can fix the value of foreign coin? How does that work? But Charles Beard says it's not just coining money and telling us how much it's worth that's cool. It's the standard of weights and measures that is amazing. When the United States came into being with our Constitution, this clause allowed the federal government to enact, Congress with George Washington signing the bills, some very strict oversights of weights and measures, the results of which are that the United States gains a reputation of selling products that are of the highest quality and of the most exacting nature. So if you were in Barbados and you ordered 3 barrels of AAA wheat, what shows up at the dock is exactly 3 barrels of AAA wheat. Not AA, not single A, AAA wheat. You see, been stamped by us, the federal government. Our reputation overseas becomes everything in the 18th and early 19th century. Our products are demanded because people know that the standards of weights and measures in the United States is enforced. There's little corruption. People who do break the rules are going to jail, and they could trust it. This is not the case. I once remember a friend of mine who owned a shop, and he ordered some products from France, and they didn't arrive, and then they didn't arrive, and they didn't arrive. He's trying to figure out what's going on. He calls, and they were having some kind of dock strike. Nothing left the country. Nothing. Not U.S. Anyway. Charles Beard also pointed to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 7 to establish post office and post roads. Mega important. According to Charles Beard, one of the most amazing clauses in the United States. We were one of the first countries, I think second, to create a national post office. England was the first. And we gave the post office, which was a federal agency at the time, the right to create post roads. So they made their own routes. Now this is extremely important if you have someone who orders so much product. How do you get it from point A to point B? If you're in Norfolk, Virginia in 1790 and someone orders, a bunch of bricks, you're a brickmaker, and you need to get them to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, how do you get them there? So, you create a post office. You see, because if you had to do it yourself, you would have to hire a driver, have to hire horses, have to purchase a buggy, you have to load the buggy, then you have to go from Norfolk, Virginia to Harrisburg. That's going to take, back then maybe 6-7 days. Each one of those days they got to stay in a hotel, they got to find livery for the horses, they got to, those add up, and then by the time you get to Harrisburg and unload everything, the cost is prohibitive. So what if you could pay postage rates and have someone take that load of bricks for you? Because they're always going between Norfolk and Harrisburg on their roads. It says right there. That's what Article 1, Section 8, Clause 7 does. It drops the price of transporting goods immensely. And that's good for business. It's good for the economy. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, he shall have power to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senator of the senators present at the time concur, and he shall nominate judges of the Supreme Court. Now he is referring to the president. These powers of the president. They have power to make treaties. So the president is our representative overseas. Of course, he's got to get 2/3 of the senators present to concur. But he shall also nominate judges of the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, again, is a stable government entity that we'll talk about a little bit later. But the fact that we have just one representative for all 13 states rather than 13 representatives for 13 states. Imagine if there were 50 governors running around the world trying to, make treaties and such. That's just not right. So the federal government takes care of that. And because there's one for all, more business is being conducted, more treaties are being signed, more commerce is being conducted, good for the economy. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2. Each state shall appoint in each manner as the legislatures thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress. What the Electoral College does is remove the presidency from the people. You and I do not elect the President of the United States still today. That is done by an Electoral College, electors. Al Gore beat George W. Bush in the 2000 election by 500,000 votes. He still lost the election because of the Supreme Court and because of the electors in the Electoral College. And Al Gore is not the only president to win the he wasn't president, not the only presidential candidate to win the larger number of the popular vote yet not become president. Again, it goes to the electors, and it's the state that is nominating the electors. You and I never get to vote for the electors. What we're doing here, according to Charles Beard, is we're removing 1/3 of the government from popular clamor, from popular anger, and letting the Electoral College do the job instead. Article 1, Section 3, Clause 1, the Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, chosen by the legislature thereof, for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. Charles Beard says that here is the Senate, which is half of Congress. The people do not vote for in the original Constitution. This has been amended, by the way, but in the original Constitution, you and I could not vote for the senators in our state. So today we have Senator Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer. We wouldn't ever be able to vote for them. The state legislatures would elect their senators. And so, okay, we don't elect the president, and now we don't elect half of Congress. What else? What's going on is according to Charles Beard again, non-democratic stability. The judicial branch, we don't get to vote for. That's 1/3 of the federal government. The executive branch, we didn't get to vote for. We still don't get to vote for. That's 1/3. The legislative branch, or half of it, of that third, we don't get to vote for. Basically, we only got to vote for 1/6 of the federal government in the 1790s, 10s, and 1810s and 20s, until Andrew Jackson, until that Constitution was amended. Still today, 2/3 of the federal government we don't get to vote for. We only vote for 1/3 of the federal government today. But back then it was only 1/6 of the federal government is ever voted for. But stability is the key here, because if you have a stable government, then the economy can flourish. A war is devastating. You don't want an unstable and a revolution every now and then, right? Look at the Civil War. Crazy. Let's talk about this Charles Beard thesis in context and history, because I bet you're going, I never thought of that before. So, how smart is this Charles Beard guy? Well, that's kind of... In 1909, there's a guy named Carl Becker. In 1913, Charles Beard writes his economic interpretation of the Constitution of the United States. And I put Becker up there because Becker was the one in 1909 that first thought of the idea that the Constitution might be economic. The two met, and the two got to talking, and lo and behold, out comes this great book. Now, President William Howard Taft had a reaction to the Charles Beard thesis, and it was not good. He called it a bunch of rigmarole and anti-American this and that. And anyway, historians by and large bought the argument, and they accepted it. So all the way out through the decade of the 1920s, the decade of the 1930s, and the decade of the 1940s, this is 3 decades, 30 years, the Charles Beard thesis just hums along, just fine and dandy. But then, after the war, World War II, after a little training in college, out come the postmodern historians of the late 1950s, and they found some flaws. So from Forrest McDonald, we get a 1958 publication called We the People, The Economic Origins of the Constitution. And he talks about political unity, national economic development, and diplomatic security are 3 things that Charles Beard misses. And that all these things, a national economic policy, doing things for the general welfare of the country, that's diplomatic security, the idea of political unity, these are good things. And that's what the Constitution gave to the United States. Welcome aboard. Yes. Here's the thing that I want to talk about. That's Charles Beard thesis, folks. History as a discipline is research intensive. I think you've kind of figured that out by now. But hey, believe it or not, don't tell anybody, but we're at the halfway point this week. At the end of this week, we have finished 8 weeks. There's only 16 in the semester. We're halfway done. So if you haven't figured it out yet, it's about research. And so what does that mean? It means I want you to put down as a skill on your resume, I have excellent research skills. And say, well, I know I have excellent research skills because I got an A or a B in Mr. Crowder's class, History 17A. Worked my butt off. We had to do these research things, review 6 of these things, and on the discussion boards, it was hell, but I've got this skill down. And go, oh yeah, okay. So understand that that's what all of this is about, sort of. And the definition of research, I gotta it's a noun: diligent and systematic inquiry or investigation into a subject in order to discover or revise facts, theories, applications. And there's more. But the stuff in red, that's the important stuff. You have to be diligent. You have to be systematic about it. Keep asking questions. A systematic way of asking questions every time you read a document, whether it's a primary document, a secondary, even your textbook. Who wrote this? Why did he write it? For what purpose? Who's the audience? Those kind of things. Systematic inquiry. It's an investigation to discover things, yes, but if things have been discovered, to revise some of those things. And that's what the history of the different schools of history showed you, how different schools through time have revised history, shown you new ways to look at it. Alright, I'm done here. Let's go on to something kind of more fun. So you have your textbook, you have your library, and you have Google Scholar. You can use that. You have Wikipedia, sort of, right? You can't cite it, but you can abuse it. It tells you where to go to get stuff. It's cool. Research is so much easier now today. Your Ngram viewer, all of this stuff makes research doable. Just takes time. Let's talk about yes, sources of government revenue. How does government make its money? Well, a lot of the ways government makes money is they sell bonds. We've already talked about the treasury bond, right? Government says, hey, give me a bunch of money. I'll pay it back in 30 years with 3.5% interest. And usually those 30-year treasury bonds are a lot of money. Some of them $50,000. Here's $50,000, government. That's the quickest way that a government can bring in revenue, is to sell bonds. They sell in seconds. People buy them. Other governments around the world buy our bonds. China owns the majority of America's bonds. Not the majority. I mean, they own a bunch of our bonds. They would be, of all the countries that have bought U.S. bonds, China is number one. That's what I meant to say. Yeah, taxes. That's one way the government brings in money, but there's different forms of taxes. So there's import-export taxes, and you need a big customs house in order to do that. Back in the 18th, 19th century, ships pulled into port. Those are where customs houses were. But now we have airports, and there's only certain airports in the United States that are designated international airports. And when you step off a plane, what's there? Customs guys, right? Do you declare anything? And if you declare something, they put a tax on it. Boom, got to pay it. And we still have port facilities today. We still tax imports, called a tariff. And sometimes we tax our own exports. It's kind of weird, but we do. And the government, that's the quickest way for the government, or the second quickest way for the government to make money. It takes a whole year. Every day you're doing that. Bonds are sold in seconds, right? What else do you have? Well, there's excise taxes. That's an exact tax, as we mentioned before. Excise taxes, by the way, are pretty cool. If you want people to stop smoking, just tax cigarettes. I mean, we've been taxing cigarettes forever. Like, I don't smoke. I never have. I don't know how much a pack of cigarettes cost. What, $4 or $5? I don't know. $7? Cigarettes in there are probably worth $1. All the rest is tax. If the government wanted everybody to smoke, it would take away the excise tax on cigarettes, become cheap again, people would start lighting up. Right? One way to control the population. Hey. Property tax. Yeah, the federal government has a property tax. It does. It's not just a state that have property taxes. Federal government can levy taxes on property as well. Sales tax, usually local. Right? Local governments do that. Poll taxes when you go to vote. Those were popular for a while. We don't have those anymore. Well, not yet. Maybe this election. But there's one more way. There's one more way that the government can bring in money. Anybody know? If you said war, you'd be right. We went to war as soon as we had defeated Britain and signed a treaty and became our own country, and the Constitution and even before the Constitution is created, we began making money off of war with Indians. We seized their land. If the federal government seizes land, what can the federal government do with that land? Yeah, you're right. Sell it. Where does that money go? It goes to the government, and then the government can the redistribution work. They can redistribute the land any way they want. And back in the 18th century, we used the selling of land. The government would then spend the money on internal projects such as building roads, canals, port facilities, and choo-choo trains. Railroads were gifted land, and then the sale of the lands by railroads financed their projects. See? Now, if you lose the war, that's not a good way of making money. You can lose money that way. You got to win, keep winning, and then you can make money that way. So that's how government makes its money. So let's talk about bonds here. How do bonds work? So I want to kind of explain it to you here. We got a bond. It's a $1 million bond. Now this is a piece of paper. So if I gave the federal government this piece of paper, back up. I gave the federal government $1 million, they'd give me a piece of paper. Fair exchange? Yeah, let's find out. How does it work? Alright, I give the government $1 million. The government gives me this piece of paper here. Now this piece of paper is important. It's got some interesting things on it. First, it says that I'm going to get paid in 30 years. See, if you read the fine print down here, it was bought in 1977 and it's payable in 2007. That's 30 years. That's cool. So I get my $1 million back in 30 years? Yes, but you also get it at interest, 7.625% interest. You see, back in the 70s, the United States was kind of on a rough road, and that's how I know the United States is doing great now. It's like less than 3.5% interest on a treasury bill. Back in the 70s, it was 7.625. We must be doing great. If you watch Fox News, no, we're not. No, we're doing great. I know, because I opened the Wall Street Journal and it says 3.5% interest on a 30-year treasury bill. Yeah, we're doing great. Anyway, what does that mean? 7.625% interest on $1 million for 30 years means that at the end of year one, I will get paid a check from the United States Treasury for $76,250. I didn't do anything. I didn't work for that money. It's just there. It just shows up. So see how that is? Okay, I give the government $1 million. They give me this piece of paper. They said, "Oh, we'll pay you back in 30 years with interest." So the first interest check at the end of year one is $76,250. At the end of year two, there'll be another check for $76,250. At the end of year three, another check, and year four, another check, and on and on and on, so that after 30 years, I will have collected in interest $2 million plus. See? 2.2875 million to be exact. Woo! And then I'll get my $1 million back. And that means over 30 years, my $1 million has turned into $3,287,500. Assuming that when I got those $76,250 yearly checks, I didn't spend any of it. Of course I did. Sorry. No, I don't have that kind of money. So that's how a bond works. Now, the cool thing is, you're the United States of America. It's year 29, and you got to pay that $1 million back. You just make some more bonds, and you float that over. It's called floating. So you just float it over into the next bond. The debt's carried over. It's floated. That's what the United States does quite a bit. It's cool. I wish I could do it, but I'm just a person. I won't live for 250 years like the USA. By the way, I did check. It's 3.12%. United States is doing just fine. See, that's how bonds work. Again, the higher the interest rate, the least stable the country. I could buy a bond from Greece, but I might not ever see that money again. Right? So the question was, in 1776, who bought these British bonds? And this was one of the reasons why America has this thing with banks. Because the answer also leads you to why Alexander Hamilton wanted a national bank. So the answer to your question is in the Common Sense pamphlet written by Thomas Paine. The people who bought bonds, who bought British bonds to fight the colonialists, were very wealthy people all throughout Europe. And also very, well, I can't say wealthy, but other governments in Europe who were allies with Britain at the time bought British bonds. Anybody could buy a bond. But again, going back to Alexander Hamilton, he wants a national bank. Why? So he can sell bonds to wealthy people and raise some money to pay off debt. This is the first national bank of the United States. It no longer exists, but there it is, or there it was, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In 1791, Congress authorized the bank, but opposition to the bank was very strong. I shouldn't say that people distrusted the banks, but they did. We just fought a war against bonds. The British funded their war. All those weapons that they bought, muskets and bullets and those fancy red coats, all that stuff they bought, the ships and everything, bought with other people's money through banks. Yuck. So there's opposition to banks very early in America. Still, I think many people are not very happy with banks today. I don't think so. In 1811, the bank will die. It will not get a charter renewed. That's a problem, because in the year 1812 we go to war and we really needed a national bank to sell bonds, but we didn't have one. It's kind of ironic. Talking about your essays, I'm very slow in getting back to you on this, and I really apologize, but all your written work must be footnoted or endnoted, depending on the assignment, following Turabian style methods and citations, also known as the Chicago Manual style, because it was written by Kate Turabian. So when you write an essay in this class, you have to footnote Okay? Make sure you do that. Most of you did not. Need to point that out. Journals a little bit. They offer clues on other secondary sources. So I love journals because they're very focused. Book is huge, 300, 400, 500,000 pages. What is this? But no, journals are very small. An essay might have, well, you see on the bottom here, Richard McCormick is one of the journal entried essays that's in the William and Mary Quarterly, and it's only 11 pages, 112 to 122. And it's very focused. What's it talking about? It's talking about the Ordinance of 1784. It's so much more quicker. And the other cool thing about journal essays are they're very heavily cited. So there's a lot of clues in the citations. If you read them closely, you can find other primary documents, other secondary source materials that might be good for your topic. So do check some of the JSTOR articles that are out there. Okay, you might pull up an American Historical Review, by the way. Very good. Thanks. That's it. That's the end. We'll talk to you soon. Ciao.